For every news story, there's more.
So we can write the best security architecture plan, but it remains an essay until it becomes manifest on ground.
More detail.
Every time you are doing reform, even when we were doing it 2006, 2007, the question is also that it's not the right time. When will be the right time?
More than just the headline. This is News Extra on Radio Now 95.3 FM.
On News Extra today, we turn to the Middle East, where Hezbollah has confirmed that it launched 320 missiles and drones at Israel over the weekend. Hezbollah described this latest action as the first phase of its retaliation following last month's assassination of one of its commanders, Fuad Shukr. While there were no casualties recorded in Israel, the Zionist nation went on to launch 100 jets over Lebanon in retaliation, killing 3 people. With tensions at an all-time high, fears of an escalation continue to rise. For an analysis of the situation, we are joined by international affairs commentator Irina Sukerman. Ms. Sukerman, thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
What can you tell us about the state of affairs, especially with the world looking on to the situation that was recorded in the Middle East this weekend?
Interestingly enough, despite the fact that Israel launched a preemptive strike, it actually helped avoid a greater escalation. Hezbollah did attack with hundreds of rockets, but it was actually planning to launch several thousand rockets aimed at the center of the country, including Tel Aviv. And had that transpired, first of all, there likely would have been significant casualties, very significant destruction, and the response would have been far deadlier and less symbolic. The current state is that Israel essentially destroyed most of the missile sites, preventing the attack and thus saving its own citizens and preventing a greater clash.
So this attack by Hezbollah, it's coming weeks after the death of the Hezbollah commander. A lot of people had expected that we would have seen it sooner. Can you speak to why it's only just coming?
Frankly, I think it's a little bit strange to expect the attack immediately after a major event, given the fact that even Hezbollah needs to prepare and plan before launching an attack. In fact, Israel's operations in Gaza transpired over 2 weeks after October 7th, and that was due to the need to plan out possible plans of attacks. We still don't know whether that's everything Hezbollah has in mind. It is possible that there will be future attempts to extract more serious revenge. Then again, if Hezbollah wishes to avoid a more serious escalation, it actually worked out well for them that this significant attack was stopped. That way they can take credit for trying to make it happen, and even blame Israel to a certain extent, but they are also avoiding a clash that could have had much more serious consequences for them.
Now, we've seen clashes between Hezbollah and Israel since the 8th of October, but is there anything in particular that makes this incident over the weekend something more serious than what we have seen since the 8th of October?
Yes, it's actually the biggest such single attack that would have transpired had it succeeded. Now, in the past, Hezbollah has attacked Israel with hundreds of rockets at a time, but the 6,000 rocket attack on Tel Aviv would have been by far the largest incident in at least a decade, and it would have been much more serious in terms of how far they would have reached inside the country. Until recently, Hezbollah has largely focused on the north and not as much on the center of Israel.
So Hezbollah has said that they will review the impact of this particular attack, and if the results are not sufficient, they reserve the right to respond at another time. In many ways, it indicates that it seems like there's a part of it that's also dependent on how Israel responds to this initial attack. But the group did say that if a ceasefire deal is struck between Israel and the people of Gaza, that they would actually essentially sheathe their swords. Do you expect that there's likely to be a ceasefire before the next set of attacks?
I do not believe that there's going to be a ceasefire deal in the near future. Yahya Sinwar may put on conditions that make it even harder, if not impossible, for Israel to agree, which include basically a no-kill condition. And it's not entirely clear how that condition is expected to be enforced. If Sinwar only talks about the period of the actual exchange, then once Israel commits to not killing him, there's nothing stopping him from hurting or killing the remaining hostages. If, on the other hand, he's talking about a longer-term situation and a condition that he will not be killed even after hostages are released, that is not acceptable, because he remains the mastermind of October 7th and will certainly work on planning further attacks. So as of now, I don't really see how this deal is expected to proceed.
Now, these attacks have concerned a lot of international players, particularly the U.S. And the wave of this, we need to understand if the U.S. has a chance of stopping the outbreak of war in the Middle East.
Well, so far, U.S. has done very little to pressure the actors responsible for the initial aggression. There's been very little pressure on Qatar, other than verbal pressure, to hold the Doha-based leadership accountable. With Sinwar in Gaza, there's even less of a chance for anyone to pressure Hamas on putting an end to an act of aggression. Another factor complicating the situation is that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority entered into a unity deal, which makes it extremely difficult from a political perspective to now separate these entities, and also it endangers even the West Bank, essentially giving Hamas a free hand in gathering weapons there. Hamas has established a stronghold in West Bank, and Iranian weapons have been flowing there through Syria and Jordan, which has attempted to stop them. Nevertheless, this has been a serious and ongoing condition for the past years, and while Gaza remains cut off from weapons, West Bank is not, and Hamas can continue its aggression from there. Hezbollah too determines its actions not based on U.S. pressure, but based on Iranian direction and their own interests. So, short of putting physical pressure on disrupting these attacks, on cutting off financial sources to Hezbollah, U.S. has very little to do with what happens next. The biggest thing U.S. could be doing at this time is pressuring Iran directly, but we don't see much of that happening.
There is criticism that regardless of what the pressure looks like, or this pressure that you talk about, that if the U.S. cannot get Israel to actually stick by a ceasefire deal on all sides, then Hamas is not likely to agree or stop its aggression, as you say. Israel has repeatedly changed the terms of the ceasefire agreement from the initial one that was adopted by the UN Security Council, which was put forth by the U.S. itself. The latest news says that Israel is hoping to continue having Israeli boots on the ground within the Gaza Strip. So if Israel isn't showing any commitment whatsoever to allowing a Palestinian state that is ruled by Palestinians, governed by Palestinians, what's the likelihood that the aggression, as you say, will stop?
Well, the thing is, Hamas aggression has nothing to do with the concept of Palestinian state. In fact, Hamas repeatedly repeatedly rejected the two-state solution, which is why the situation is as we see it. And nothing Israel does or does not do will change that fact, simply due to Hamas's ideological position, charter, and Iran's goals in the matter. Iran in 2015 announced a plan to destroy Israel by 2040, and encircling Israel with its proxies is certainly part of that plan. Regarding the ceasefire deal is not a permanent solution to the conflict. It's only, it was always only was supposed to be an opportunity to get Israeli hostages back, but Netanyahu from the beginning made it clear, and by the way, the United States agreed that destroying Hamas's command and control, its military control over Gaza, was also an objective and a priority, and that the war would continue even after all the hostages would be returned. And the truth of the matter, Israel cannot afford to remove its troops from Rafah, the key portion of Gaza, because that would return Hamas to the tunnels from which they were able to smuggle weapons into Gaza, and that would basically give them power to regroup, rearm, and return to the pre-October 7th status, which is unacceptable to Israel's security.
Well, Ms. Sukerman, thank you very much for your time and your expertise on the conversation. Irina Sukerman is an international affairs commentator. She joins us today on News Extra to speak on Hezbollah's latest attack on Israel, the launch of 320 missiles and drones over the weekend on Israeli territory.